tonight and tomorrow is the 9th day of the Jewish month of Av. On the 9th day of Av, twice the temple was destroyed. And as such, it's the saddest day of the year for the Jewish people. It's a day that's earmarked for pain, earmarked for suffering. It's a day when many tragic things happen to the Jewish people. And it's a day that by the redemption will be the happiest day, will be the most special day, will be the most joyous day. Because the prophet promised that these days of destruction are going to turn around and be really the holidays of redemption. But what I want to talk about today was more in a practical level, what we should be thinking about. We can work on ourselves to utilize this time to improve, like everything in our calendar. How can we be different because of the 9th of Av? So the 9th of Av has a lot to do with how we behave toward other people. I wanted to focus on that and explain to you historically why that is true. So it relates in the Talmud a very tragic story of what led to the destruction of Jerusalem, what led to the Roman conquest of Israel. And it all started off with a very sad story. A sad story of two people that have very similar names. One person's name was Kamsa, and one person's name was Bar Kamsa. That sounds pretty similar, yes. And our sages say because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. It happened this way. A certain man had a friend named Kamsa, and he had an enemy. Now, of course, that's already the beginning of the downfall because we're not supposed to have enemies. We're not supposed to look at anyone, at any person, at any Jew as an enemy. But he had someone who he viewed as an enemy. And that enemy had a very similar name to his friend. That enemy's name was Bar Kamsa. So he once made this huge lavish feast. He was a very wealthy man. And he said to his servant, go bring Kamsa. My good friend Kamsa. Well, God runs the world, and the servant made a mistake. And he brought Bar Kamsa. Servant comes to Bar Kamsa's house. He says, my master invited you to his party. He's like, your master? Who's your master? Oh, he invited me to his party? Like, we're not on the best terms. No, he sent me. He told me to come to your house and bring you to the party. Bar Kamsa's like, wow, this is wonderful. I feel so good. Of course, who wants to have people with negative emotions for you? So he was very excited. He comes to this beautiful party. He's so excited. And as soon as the host sees Bar Kamsa, he went over to him and said, what are you doing here? You're my enemy. Get out of here. I don't want you at my party. And Bar Kamsa, of course, immediately understood what happened. And he said, well, it was an innocent mistake. Your servant came and invited me. And I thought I was invited. Well, it was a mistake. And get out of here. I don't want you at my party. So Bar Kamsa felt horrible. I mean, he's going to be thrown out of the party. All these people are at the party. He's going to be so embarrassed. So he sort of said, I'm here already. Let me stay. I'll pay you for whatever the cost of my plate is. The host said, absolutely not. He said, let me stay. I'll give you half the cost of this party. Nothing. He said, let me pay for the whole. The host said, no. He took him by the hand and he threw him out. And Bar Kamsa was furious. He wasn't just furious with this host, with his enemy. He globalized and was furious with the Jewish because he said, look, at this party, there were a lot of rabbis. There were a lot of important people. They saw me being thrown out. And that means they agree with him. I'm going to go and make trouble. I'm going to go to the government and start up. At this point, Israel was controlled by the nation of Rome. It's not that Rome at this point were our best friends, but they weren't destroying us. They controlled us. They levied taxes. They did all the stuff they do to all the provinces. That's how they were a world empire. But he was like, I'm going to get Rome mad. So he went to the emperor of Rome and he said, the Jews are rebelling against you. And the emperor said, I didn't hear they're rebelling against me. None of my officers think they're rebelling against me. How do I know it's true? And this man, Bar Kamsa, said, simple, send them an offer and see if they'll offer it on the altar. If they offer it on the altar, that means they respect you. But if they take your offering and they don't offer it, that means they don't respect. That means, okay. So he sent him with a beautiful calf. Now, non-Jews are allowed to offer offerings on the temple. And he sent Bar Kamsa as his messenger with this beautiful calf. And what Bar Kamsa did was on blemish in the upper lip of the calf. Some say he made a blemish on the white of its eye. In a place that we view it as a blemish, but they wouldn't have realized. So none of the other people would recognize that, oh, it was a blemished animal. That's why the Jews didn't offer it. But for the strict standards of the Jewish people, it was a blemish. And many things happened, but at the end of the day, the Jews couldn't offer it. It was blemished. And they knew it was going to be a big problem. And And they knew Bar Kamsa was doing this to create this big problem. But they didn't offer it. And the Roman emperor said, oh, that Jew was right. They're rebelling. And he sent his army, destroyed Jerusalem, burnt the temple, ransacked the land, killed, massacred, captured, slaughtered so many of the Jewish people. Our sages therefore say, look, this whole horrific tragedy started with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Started with a case of what we call Baseless. You know, there were two temples. And as I said, both were destroyed on the same day. The first temple, we're told, was destroyed for the three hugest sins you could have: idolatry, adultery, murder. And after that destruction, the Jews were exiled. And they were in exile for 70. And the reason they were in exile for 70 years was because it needed 70 years to cleanse them of the impurities they created through these three huge sins. The second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. This incident that happened with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, obviously, yes, in the script, it was the final straw that led to the destruction of Jerusalem, that led to the destruction of really the whole Israel. But it was specifically that straw, it was specifically that incident that led to the destruction, because that incident, unfortunately, was expressive of the problem going on then that created the destruction. Yes, the Romans came. Yes, the Romans ransacked. Yes, the Romans burnt, defiled, destroyed. But everything's in the hand of God. There's a reason God was allowing that to happen. And as the story with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa indicates, the reason they allowed, God had this happen, was because of the way Jew was treating Jew, the baseless hatred. And for that baseless hatred, we've been in exile over 1900 years. So idolatry, adultery, murder, that sounds pretty severe. That took 70 years to cleanse. And baseless hatred, it's been over 1900, because that's such a deep evil. Seemingly more innocuous, but actually from such a deep, horrible spiritual place. Such a pain to God when his children treat each other that way. So what does it mean, baseless hatred? Baseless hatred means you hate someone. And then you have to figure out why. Meaning, in essence, you're hating someone because they take up space. It's because they exist. Because when someone else takes up space, you feel it minimizes your space. You feel limited because there's someone else around. But of course, you can't tell yourself, I hate this person because he's taking up space. And since he takes up space, I feel smaller. So I hate him because he makes me feel small. I mean, you wouldn't feel good with yourself if that's how you treated someone. So therefore, you make up a reason, you make up an excuse, you find some justification. But that's all made up. The real thing is simply, as we call it, ego. You exist, I've got less space to exist, I don't like it. So this is really, on a very practical basis, something to think about on the 9th of in a very foundational, in a very real way, of what can I do to upgrade how I treat other? What could I do to upgrade how I treat Jews, my brothers? We're all part of this one beautiful family of the Jewish people. And of course, sometimes when hard things are happening, like of course we experienced this year, you really feel it. We're part of the family of the Jewish people. We're one family, we're one tribe. How do I not only love the Jewish people, but that individual, that person, and that person that maybe I have a hard time? So I was going to share just things that work for me, and then hopefully people have things that they can share that work for them. And hopefully you'll hear something that's going to work for you. You only have to walk away with something. If you can think of one way you can improve in how you treat another person, that's a victory for the 9th of Av. So 2 things that help me a lot I'm going to share. One is a tool which is discussed in Tanya, and which I really think is so valuable, and I see it as so practical. is the tool of compassion, as we have discussed many times, because I think it's a really practical tool. Compassion means when you're dealing with someone who's difficult for you, you're dealing with someone who you don't have positive feelings for, when you're dealing with someone who, for whatever reason, gives you discomfort, stress, annoyance, you can fill in the blanks. Instead of allowing yourself to feel a negative emotion towards them, when you recognize that negative emotion rearing its not so pretty head, focus on you could tell yourself, oh my gosh, they have to live with themselves all day long. Meaning, compassion has an enormous power to mitigate hatred and to open up our channels of love. And when you have compassion for someone, you can't be hurt by them. You don't get hurt by someone you have compassion for, because it like shifts the balance in the relationship. You're a giver, you're not a receiver, you're not equal, you're really a giver when you're in this mode of compassion. So you're not getting hurt by them, just like you wouldn't get hurt by a child who is rude and obnoxious to you. But it's not a relationship of equals. You're the adult, they're the child. Children are sometimes rude and obnoxious, and you just understand it because they're a child and move on. So I'm not saying you should think of another adult as a child, but I'm saying similarly, when you have compassion for someone, maybe they're even deliberately trying to be hurtful, but you just don't get hurt. You're protected because you're giving to them this compassion, so you're not absorbing in a way that hurts you their negative energy. You're just like brushing it off. What does compassion mean? Compassion means feeling anything you could tell yourself to feel compassion. You could be feeling, who knows what type of day they had to be treating me this way? Who knows what type of life they had to be treating me this way? Who knows what they're dealing with to be talking to me like this, or to be acting like this, or to be asking me for this, or who knows? Somebody could ask you for this big inappropriate favor, and it's like, what do they think they are? How could they ask me that? That's so inappropriate. That's so not like, why did they ask me to do that? Tell yourself, I don't know. Who knows what's going on? And I could have compassion for all the things I don't know. Or if this is a frequent person in your world that frequently treats you and others inappropriately, you can have compassion. I don't know what happened to them when they were younger, or what's going on now in their marriage, what stresses they have now in their life. But I can have compassion because I imagine there must be something for them to treat me and other people this way. So you don't have to know the detail. And you don't even have to try to imagine the details. It's not our business. I don't need to know. But I can have compassion for the pain they must be in to treat, or to treat other people. And that compassion really is such an amazingly powerful tool we have that really lessens our negative feelings and frees our positive. So you can use compassion for the obnoxious driver on the road. You can use compassion for people that are in your life on a daily basis, friends and colleagues and family. Obviously, for each person, you might be using it differently. You might be scripting something different. End of the day, it's the same power of life. There has to be some pain here. There has to be something dysfunctional. There has to be something wrong here for them to behave in this way that's, hurting me so much, or trying perhaps to hurt me so much. And if I have that compassion, I'm not hurt, and I don't feel negative energy towards. So that's one tool that I see is so powerful. And in so many people in hard situations, I've advised them, obviously modifying it according to the situation, to use that tool, and it really works very, very, very well. So that's one thing that helps me. Something else that helps sometimes, again, depending on the situation, but sometimes if someone not behaving properly, let's call it, or doing something that's, hurtful or whatever. And I tell myself, this person is just like I struggle with my evil inclination. She struggling with his or hers. And it's very possible that this other person's evil inclination is far lighter than mine, far less significant than mine. So how can I get upset by what he's doing? He's just doing the same thing I do with different window dressing. So when I think like that, it really, really helps me, because it really makes me feel like, how could I get upset at this person? How could I be bothered by this person when in essence, I do the same thing? I could be bothered if I'm doing the same thing. Now, of course, I'm not doing the same, not treating a person the way this person is treating me. I'm not doing that. But I do other things wrong. I do my things wrong. He's doing his things wrong. But we both have areas of weakness. We both have areas that we do things wrong. We both have areas. It might be very different in degree. It might be different in duration. It might be different, obviously, in manifestation. But we both have things that are our weaknesses. So if I remind myself of my own weakness, of my own humanity, I can be more tolerant of the other person. It also works. At least for me, this works very, very well. And just sort of like diffusing any upset or negative feeling. Because how can I be upset at someone who's doing the same thing I do? Like, I mean, that would be very, hypocritical. I'm very tolerant of myself. So if I'm tolerant of myself, I should extend the same tolerance to other people. These are two things that really help. Anyone has ideas? Anyone have techniques they use that help them extend themselves and feel love or act with love, act graciously, create a warm, positive, loving environment between themselves and other people and other Jews in their life?
So if I don't have like sincere feelings of love in my heart, I'm trying to do some actions, some work. Like if the person that I don't feel friendly with or like the person, I still try to help, do something physical if I can. And I say to myself, it's okay if I don't feel love for this person yet. At least I can help with something. So that's what helps me.
I think that's a great idea. I really like it because we know, as is written in Holy Book, Sefer Chinuch, that our actions create our inner reality. Often in the modern world, 21st century psychology world, we look at everything on the inside and how that our action. But in Jewish thought, we're told that our actions create our inner reality. Actions have a tremendous significance impacting us inward. So I think what Manucha is saying is brilliant because she's saying I can't feel nicely towards these people. I even give myself a pass for not feeling warm and loving towards this person, but I'm demanding that I treat them well in the realm of action. So that's doing two things. One thing it's doing is, okay, you know what? At least in the realm of action, I'm helping someone else, and that's pretty good. But also what it's doing is it's actually inside is shifting a bit your feeling, because when you give to someone, it does help you feel more for them. That's what we're told. The Jewish word for love in the Hebrew is ahava, and the root word of ahava is hav, which means to give. So when we give, we love. Like if you think of a mother who's giving nonstop to her children, especially when they're so young and helpless, this creates such a deep love for the child. The giving is the love. The more the giving, the more the love. That's how God wired us. So when you're saying, I can't feel, but I'm going to do an action, that action is a wonderful expression of positivity, even if you don't feel it, impacts your inner reality, and the more you give, the more you do love. So I think that's a great idea. Anyone else?
Can I ask you,
Sure.
are we supposed to have the same reaction to non-Jews? Like, are we also like trying to help, to have compassion, to love the person, or it's only concerning to Jews?
That's a great question. So we have a different obligation for Jews and non-Jews because, as I said before, Jews is family. We're all family. We're a family of at least 15 million, plus all of those that don't respond on surveys and claim they're Jewish, plus all of those that have no clue that they're Jewish. So this 15 million plus family of the Jewish people, we're family. And you have a special responsibility for your family. But we do have an obligation to treat respectfully all mankind. And that's for two reasons. One reason is there's something called honoring people, honoring man, honoring God's creations. Every single human being is a creation of God. And as such, every single human being should be treated properly and respectfully as creation. Like, the line, you see it like on different little keychains and things. God doesn't create junk, right? God doesn't create junk. People aren't junk. God doesn't create junk. So we do have a concept of honoring the dignity of man, of treating all man respectfully, because they're creations of God. We also have another obligation, which is there's a constant obligation on all of us as Jews to bring honor to God. And if we don't behave properly, we're God's billboard. Now you could think, I'm not God's billboard. I never signed up for this. But we are. I mean, even when we don't want to be, even if we don't think we are, as long as they know you're Jewish, if they somehow realize you're Jewish, whatever you do in either direction becomes decontextualized. It's not you, it's the Jew who did good, the Jew who did the opposite. So we always have that onus and responsibility that we represent God. And as such, we want to always behave in a way that will bring credit to God. So, for those two reasons, we do have an obligation to treat everyone in a very respectful, honorable way. And we have an extra obligation of love. For man, we have to give honor. For our family, for the Jewish people, we have to give love. And that's for the Jews. Anyone else have techniques? I thought what Menucha said was great. I'm actually right. I actually wrote it down. Anyone else have things they do that helps them? We've all been in this situation. We all know what it means. But anyone have a technique worth sharing?
Well, it's funny that she mentioned about we are obligated to do the same for non-Jews. And I was going to say, before she asked, I was going to say that I find myself having easier compassion when it is a Jew who would, say something that, I want to be reactive but I won't have the same compassion when it's, for example, a coworker or somebody, upsets me, or I'll be more straightforward, I should say.
Interesting. And
So,
some people could say the opposite. They could say, with your family, you're ruder. And if it's not in your family, you'll be more appropriate. So I think it probably depends on like personality and background and just
yeah,
how
yeah,
you've seen this in your life play out in your life. But definitely, clearly, we have an obligation to be respectful to everyone, both
sure.
respecting God's creations and always wanting to represent God in a great light. And we have an additional obligation, special obligation, to really feel love as an emotion. But as Manucha said, we can create that emotion through action, to feel love for everyone in our family, for all of our fellow Jews. Rachel, were you going to share also a technique that you use to act, to get yourself to feel when sometimes it's stressful?
Yes, I do. I actually I'll think for a second, it's a split of a second, and I will make myself do the opposite of what I feel like I want to do.
Oh, okay.
So, and you know what, it works. I just, sometimes you get upset and you want to come back with something aggressive, but then I'll do the opposite, and then I'll ask questions, and then I'm able to soften the situation.
That takes a lot of self-control.
Yeah, sometimes.
That's an impressive self-control, and it's interesting because Maimonides says that we change things by going to the opposite extreme. Like if you're stingy and it's not nice and you want to be regular, he says don't be regular. Be ultra generous. And after being ultra generous after a while, you could become regular. Like you're going to change and shift your nature by going to the opposite extreme. So what Rachel is saying is, if I really want to be aggressive, I can say, the opposite. I'll be so nice and kind. And that's a great idea. That's a very good idea. Anyone else? Anyone else can share what they do in these types of situations that we all encounter? Well, I think something we should speak about when we're discussing this, because again, if we're going to this ninth of situation, and we spoke of Bar Kamsa and his pain, which of course he then globalized big time. But we are sometimes, of course, in a situation where people are treating us inappropriately. I mean, it happened to Bar Kamsa. He obviously did not handle it as we should, but maybe not as dramatically. It happens to all of us. So if we're being real and we're saying, well, it's the ninth of Israel, the Jewish people, the land, there's a lot of stuff in the balance. So I want to upgrade my act. And I want to act with love. And this is really important. And this so much has to do with the energy of today. So we discussed how we can improve, but what do you do if you feel you're the victim? How are you supposed to be so wonderful and, as like Rachel saying, switch when you're really feeling, but they're treating me like this? So I think there's a few things we can keep in mind, because I think this is very practical, and we, it happens sometimes. Sometimes you could tell yourself, if my eye was smaller, this wouldn't bother me. Meaning, if a person's hurting me or doing something that makes me feel made small or not good or uncomfortable or attacked or whatever, or ignored or whatever, maybe I should take this as a sign to try to lessen my ego needs. Because if my ego was smaller, this probably wouldn't bother me the same. Now, that is not true for every situation. I'm throwing out a few ideas that help me, but obviously it's very situation specific. Sometimes, this actually I do think of a lot, this actually works for me very much, is if I'm going through stress, here we're talking about interpersonal stress, it could also be other stress. I tell myself, view it as a cleansing. In the Hebrew, we call it kapara. Kapara means God sometimes sends us suffering to remove any inappropriate stuff we have on our heart, on our mind, on our soul. Any negative stuff that was supposed to come to our direction, God takes care of it with some kapara, more minor suffering. So sometimes if someone's being just obnoxious, rude, not nice, I tell myself, okay, thank you, God. I'm so glad this is my suffering and nothing worse. I'm so glad this is my suffering, and I'm sure whatever I had on record just got cleansed, and I'm so glad it got cleansed. Thank you so much that you did this. And again, it helps me sometimes. Depends on the situation. You have to see if the technique would work for you. But everything is happening from God. Yes, maybe this happens to be a rude person, but why are they coming in my direction? Why am I now, being the target? Obviously, God wants me to experience this. And why would God want me to experience this? Well, I guess probably to remove some garbage that I have inside through this, thank God, minor suffering. So thank you for this suffering so I can accept it, because I'm glad I got it. I'm glad I got rid of whatever garbage was there. A little more higher level along those lines is that our sages say those that are shamed and don't shame back, they hear their disgrace and they don't respond. These people are so precious to God. It's really hard. It's really hard. It takes a lot of self-control to be, as the sage is saying here, shamed. You don't respond by shaming, because that's human, reaction, knee jerk. Oh, really? Here they're just gaze. They don't respond. There's nothing you're going to say at that point that's going to be good, and they just keep quiet. It takes a lot of self-control. It's very, very precious to God. Sometimes we can just think, okay, God, you're giving me the opportunity to do something that is really precious to you. I'm giving you a gift. This is hard for me, but I'm happy I could give. Anyone have any other ideas that they do? How they get over when people are treating them inappropriately?
I think it's really beautiful what you just said about looking at it as a kapara. It's like, okay, something worse could have happened, but thank you that this is the only thing that happens, and I thank you, Hashem, for this. It's not easy to practice it, but I think that it's it's a higher, I think it's a higher level, but I think it's really important to remind ourselves whenever something like that happens, then you just be thankful and remind yourself that this is what Hashem wants you to experience in this moment, and be thankful for it rather than get upset at
And
that
the more
person
you
or
think that thought, the more natural the thought becomes. Our brains work that way. So if the first 20 times it feels very unnatural and very fake, and like, I don't really believe that. This isn't me. No, I'm rejecting this. But keep thinking it anyway, and it might take the 21st time, it might take the 15th time, it might take the 30th time. At a certain point, your mind naturally thinks that.
Mhm.
So it just becomes very natural and very automatic, and you don't have to be super focused. It's just like your response is like, oh, kapara, this was to cleanse me. Thank you for a very, relatively speaking, minor cleansing.
Yeah. Okay. I have one question about Tisha B'Av.
Hmm.
Since I became Balat Shuva, every time, every I go to shul, today is the first time after I don't know how many years that I don't go to listen to the Echa. Um, so is it something that we're actually supposed to do at home
Absolutely.
by ourselves? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Um, just want to point out something else from the story that happened that I think is something we can also think about in terms of ourselves, because again, we're discussing these things, as I said initially, there's a lot you're not allowed to talk about today. On the ninth of Av, you have to really be focused on ninth of appropriate concepts. So another angle that I think of when I think of this story of what happened to Bar Kamsa and then how he responded. So his feelings were very hurt. He was very pained. I mean, he was willing to pay for the entire party. It was this lavish party. He was willing to pay for the entire party to not be embarrassed. And he wasn't going to go around saying, "Hey, this is my party, guys." He was giving all this money to someone. Obviously, there's this mutual feelings of enmity here to save himself from embarrassment. So he was going through a lot of pain, but then he turned around his pain and he globalized to the entire Jewish, meaning the host. We don't even know the host's name. He's not mentioned in the story. And obviously the host was completely wrong, right? He was completely wrong in what he did, but his name isn't mentioned. We don't know who he was. The host was completely wrong. Bar Kamsa was the victim. But then instead of Bar Kamsa even leaving in disgrace and saying, "Oh my gosh, wow, that guy better not come near me with a 10-foot pole. Boy, what I'm going to do to him." No, that wasn't good enough. His anger, his pain, his hurt was so huge, he had to vent it on the Jewish people. He was a Jew. He was a Jew who plotted and succeeded in destroying the Jewish people, in destroying the land, in destroying Jerusalem, in destroying the temple. So I think that's also a strong message from this story, because the sages are putting the story in very bold, like neon letters. This is what caused the destruction of Jerusalem. And we're supposed to be looking at ourselves, obviously, and like, well, I don't want to be the destroyer of Jerusalem. You know, if you don't rebuild, you're part of the destruction committee. So do I ever do this? Just sometimes a person hurts me and I don't like the race. I don't like that whole family. I don't like that whole profession. It's not a pretty human response, but it is a human response. And I think it's something also worth thinking about as we're trying to think of how I can improve and create baseless love to replace this baseless hate. How I could be really living a messianic existence. Because that's what it's like by Mashiach. By the redemption, we're all going to have this baseless love. We don't need to have a reason. How do we start now, and how do we look at ourselves and see, what am I doing that's maybe not so right? And how can I turn it around and make it really? I do want to say, of course, because I wouldn't want to just end on the sad note, is in the end, what saves us is a relationship with God. Meaning, as we know, we're here. We're still here. We're the only ancient race still around. We are definitely the most persecuted throughout all time and in all geographic locations. The most persecuted of all the races. And we're still around. 15 million plus. We're still around. So what maintains us? Our relationship with God. And we see here, through the sage, through the leader of the Jews, God extended divine protection. There's an amazing piece of this tragic story, which is how the Jews were not completely decimated by the Romans, because that was the original goal. That was what they wanted to do. But what happened? So as we have the siege around Jerusalem, and unfortunately for many sad, tragic reasons, and Jew against Jew tragic reasons, there was no food in Jerusalem. There was no water in Jerusalem. The people were dying. And there was a group of people, zealots, that really destroyed all the food storage because they wanted the Jews to fight. They had this vision they could fight and take down the Romans, which obviously wasn't happening. The sages wanted to make peace with the Romans, but the zealots wouldn't allow them to, and they barricaded the city, and they wouldn't let anyone out. So you have the Romans who are trying to get into the very strong walls. You have the Jews dying from hunger and thirst inside. And you have the zealots that will kill anyone who tries to leave, let alone who tries to make peace with the Romans. Now, again, God runs the world. So very interestingly, the head of the zealots, his name was Abba Sikra, and he was the nephew of the leader of the sages, whose name was the Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sent a message to his nephew. He says, "Come to me privately." Oh, it's his uncle. No, like the enemy, because I'm the zealots, you're the sages. You guys want to make peace. We're not letting anyone make peace. We're actually not letting anyone go out to talk to the Romans, but I mean, it's my uncle. So he came. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to him, "How long are you carrying on this way and kill all the people with starvation? Like, what do you think's happening? The Romans aren't leaving. They know we have no food. In the end, there'll be no one left alive. We have to, you know." And Abba Sikra said, what can I do? Yes, officially I'm the head of the zealots, but if I say anything to them, they'll kill me too. So Rabbi Yochanan said, think up some plan for me to escape the city. Maybe I'll be able to save a little. So Abba Sikra said to him, pretend to be ill. Let it be known in the city. I mean, you're Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, everyone knows you. You're the leader of the sages. So everyone should know you're sick. Everyone should start talking about it. Everyone should be asking how he's doing. Bring something that smells really bad and put it by you so that, they'll say you died. And they'll let your students carry your bed. And don't let anyone else carry it because they'll realize you're light. A human being is lighter than a corpse. And okay, that's the plan. And then that way, because they didn't bury people in Jerusalem, if somebody was dead, they got out of the city. So that's what happened. And he had two of his closest students, Rabbi Eliezer on one side, Rabbi Yeshua on the other, and they're carrying him out. And when they reach the gate, the zealots, they wanted to put a sword through the body to make sure it's dead. And one of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, of course, they knew he was alive, still alive. They don't want a sword going through him. So one of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's students said, the Romans are going to say you pierced your master? Meaning if you put a sword through him, when we take him out, the Romans are going to think you killed him. He's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the leader of the Jewish people. They're going to say you killed the leader of the Jewish people. So they think, okay, yeah, that was a bad idea. So they said, okay, let's just give the body a push. They were very suspicious because they didn't want anyone to get out who wasn't dead. So they were very suspicious. So they figured they'd push the body. If it's dead, it's a dead body. And if it's alive, it's a living body. And they say, should they say you push the master? And for some reason, God put it in their hearts. They accepted that. They opened up the gate and they got Rabbi Yochanan out. So Rabbi Yochanan went to the camp of the Romans. And he said, he's Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He's the leader of the Jews. He came to speak to the Roman general. The Roman general's name was Vespasian. He came to the Roman camp. He came to the general. And he said to him, peace to you, O king. Peace to you. Vespasian said, you just lost your life for two reasons. First of all, I'm not the king, and you called me a king. In other words, you're a rebel. I'm not the Caesar. You're calling me the Caesar, the king? You're a rebel against Rome. And if I am the king, Yochanan ben Zakkai says, you're a king. Because we know the only way Jerusalem is going to be delivered is into the hands of a king. And he quoted a verse. So at that moment, Vespasian was. But how God orchestrated the story is right there. As Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is talking to Vespasian, he gets the news that the Caesar had died and he was appointed by the Senate the next Caesar. Continuing the story. And that what you say, if you're a king, why not come till now? The zealots didn't let me. So then Vespasian asked a question to Rabbi Yochanan that it doesn't make sense he couldn't answer. Vespasian said, well, if there's a jar of honey and there's a serpent all around the jar, wouldn't you break the jar to get rid of the serpent? And Rabbi Yochanan didn't know how to answer that. And it doesn't make sense to the other sages. Rabbi Yosef, subsequently Rabbi Akiva, said, it doesn't make sense. There's an answer. Take a pair of tongs, grip the snake, kill it, and then leave the jar intact. So God's orchestrating something here that Rabbi Yochanan didn't seem as, so to speak, wise as he was. And then suddenly, at this point in the conversation, the messenger arrives from Rome to Vespasian, saying, Emperor is dead, and the notables of Rome decided to make you the next emperor. So here's Vespasian. Here's this Jew who's somehow got out of the city, who's the head of the Jews, who's coming to try to negotiate, so to speak, something for the Jewish people. And he has absolutely zero reason to listen to him. He's a nothing. He's a nobody. He's a Jew. But God orchestrated it that he told him he was going to be king minutes before he found out he was king. And then at this moment, when he has such a, wow, he's the emperor of Rome, he has this almost magnanimous feeling inside of him. That's when this Jew is here wanting things, and it's like sort of connected. So it totally shifted what otherwise would probably have been a washed out nothing situation. And different things happened there, but Vespasian said in the end they had a little bit of a dialogue back and forth. In other words, it wasn't like Vespasian was being so like, oh my gosh, you're amazing. You knew I was going to be the emperor. I'm so excited. It was a little more prickly than that. But in the end, Vespasian said, I'm going now. I'm going to Rome. I'm the emperor. I'm going to send someone to take my place, who he sent with his son, Titus, who destroyed the temple. But you can ask me something and I'll give it. Now, again, it's so clear from the storyline, because I'm saying even minutes before, I'm not taking the time to go through every detail, but it wasn't like a warm, fuzzy conversation even at this point. But Vespasian got it. He's dealing with a very holy person. This person knew he was the emperor before he knew he was the emperor. And this person's the one that, whoever he's envisioning gods, he was the one that gave him the news first. So whatever was going on inside of him, he felt he should do something for him, which obviously, again, was scripted by God to save the Jewish people. Rabbi Yochanan said 3 requests. Give me Yavne and her sages. Give me the family chain of Rabbi Gamliel. And give me physicians to heal Rav Tzadok. Rav Tzadok was a great sage who had been fasting for 40 years to forestall the destruction of the temple. Some say that he asked for the physician to heal Rav Tzadok to sort of make his request not look so significant. Oh, you need some sick Jew, you need a doctor. All right, that's not, of national significance. So the other 2 are probably also not so important. But it was the opposite. These were very, very significant things Rabbi Yochanan did. He said, give me Yavne and the sages, because he felt, I can't ask for Jerusalem. He's not going to give me Jerusalem. But Yavne was a city with many, many sages. So if Yavne, give me Yavne and her sages, it means if you don't destroy Yavne, you don't destroy the sages of Yavne, there'll be a respite. There'll be a place we can gather in. There'll be a place we can teach Torah. Torah will continue. The Jewish people will continue. The family of Rabbi Gamliel is the family of David, is a family of the kings, is a family ultimately of the Messiah, of Mashiach, of the Redeemer. Obviously, this was a family they would have killed out. This is the kingly family. Give me this family of Rabbi Gamliel. Now, again, they might not have viewed it as the kingly family in that sense of king, because at this time, the Jews didn't even have any kings of their own. They were already Roman appointees for a long time. But this was the chief family that they knew was the rabbinical heads of the Jewish people. And as such, they would have made sure they all got killed, because we want to wipe away the leaders of the Jews to make sure the Jews never rebel again. So in these 3 requests, he was ensuring the continuation of Torah. He was ensuring the continuation of the line of Mashiach. And he was ensuring that through this, the Jews would survive. Now, some say, again, some of the sages say, no, this is another example where God made Rabbi Yochanan foolish. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was brilliant, but God made him foolish. He should have said, let the Jews off the hook. Rabbi Yochanan thought, if I ask so much, I'm not going to get anything. I need to save what I can. Now, it's interesting, because if Rabbi Akiva is saying, some say it was Rabbi Yosef, some say it was Rabbi Akiva. If Rabbi Akiva is saying that he could have asked for all the Jews to be saved, and that would have been granted, that means he was right. Meaning, Rabbi Akiva or Rabbi Yosef is saying he could have asked for all the Jews to be saved, and that would have been granted. God took away from him his brilliance. God took away from him his wisdom to not ask that. Rabbi Yochanan is so wise. Rabbi Yochanan is so caring. Rabbi Yochanan sacrificed his life to be snuck out of the city to try to plead again. Like, what was he thinking? Why would the Romans give him anything? There was no logic to what he was doing. He was risking his life. Very clearly, God protected, and they didn't put the sword through him or uncover his deceit. So that was tremendous protection from God. What do you think was going to happen by Vespasian? Why would Vespasian give him anything? He's not coming with any negotiation here. He's not saying, if you do this, I'll open up the gates of Jerusalem for you. He wasn't offering anything in return. He had nothing to offer in return. So he was so loving the Jews, so wise, so caring, so self-sacrificing. God orchestrated such an unbelievable opportunity here that he knew that Vespasian has to be the king. And in those, moments, Vespasian finds out he's the king, which of course is why Vespasian said, oh, yeah, okay, I will give you something. So God orchestrated all this. If Rabbi Yochanan didn't ask to save all the Jews, and maybe on some level if he had asked, it would have been granted, it's because that wasn't God's plan. And I think that that's just the point I want to end on, because I think it's a very important point to remember if we're thinking historically of the 9th of Av, if we're thinking today, the 9th of Av 2024. It's all God's plan. There's lots of scary stuff. There's scary stuff in Israel. There's scary stuff in America. There's frightening things all over the world. If you allow yourself to be frightened, if you allow yourself to be scared. But we can twist it all around. We can change all that in our mind because we can remember it's all God's plan. All God's plan. God loves us. He's protecting us. He's bringing the redemption. And as we said, this day should be the ultimate day of celebration for all of us, for all the Jewish people, and for all the world. Thank you so much for joining on this very spiritually significant day. And I hope something from what we said, from what was shared, you could take to your heart, you could apply, and we should truly, got plenty of hours of the day ahead of us, we should truly turn it around from the day of mourning to the day of celebration. That's what we should see.
Amen.